We live in a world that is concerned with problems, and I wrote this before the end of last week, so you can understand just how this has just exploded over the last several days. But even before that, people were hurting, people were lonely, people were afraid. Our world is not the warm and fuzzy place filled with unicorns and rainbows. It's a tough place in which to live. Now that's the bad news, but there is good news. And the good news is that as Christians, we have the answer to the world's problems. We know what Jesus has done in our lives, and we know what Jesus can do in the lives of others. The question for us is, how do we get that message out? There's several ways to do it. We can invite people to come to worship with us. We can present our message through mass media. But there is another way, and that's the way that we're going to talk about this morning. And that way is through personal interaction, especially interacting with people whose lives are in turmoil. One of the greatest job duties of believers is to clean up other people's messes. And when we do that, it gives us a chance to reach out to those people and to preach Jesus to them. How do we go about doing that? Interestingly, there's a very familiar Bible story that teaches us some lessons about helping other people. Now, it's not necessarily a Bible story about evangelism, but it teaches us about the need to intervene in the lives of those who are struggling. I had Otis read from Luke chapter 10 a minute ago. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to review the story, and then we're going to take a look at 3 different ways in which we can involve ourselves in the lives of others and try to make a significant difference, not only in how they live on this earth, but where they live in eternity. So, let's go back to the story and take a look at what was discussed. First of all, let's begin with the inquiry. Jesus had just been challenged by a know-it-all, a lawyer who understood the Old Testament, a lawyer who knew the law, maybe is a better way of putting that. But he confronted Jesus about what it took to get eternal life. There was some sparring back and forth, and finally, the man, at Jesus' prompting, established the bottom line. The answer to the question of how does this man get eternal life was love God and love your neighbor. Now, like a lot of people I know, he wasn't going to let Jesus have the last word. So he asks a follow-up question, and that follow-up question is, who is my neighbor? Apparently he hadn't watched Mr. Rogers. Who is my neighbor? And this is the foundation for one of the most famous stories in the New Testament. Jesus relates a story about what it means to be a good neighbor. Let's take a look at the story. One man falls into a bad situation. He's going down what appears to be a remote road, and he is attacked by some robbers. They beat him, they take his possessions, they leave him battered and bloody on the side of the road. Now, shortly after this happens, 2 men ignore the opportunity to get involved. One of them is a priest, and he comes by, he notices the man, and not only does he walk past him, he goes to the other side, and he walks on the other side of the road past him. There's another man that walks by. This guy is a Levite. He too noticed the man, but he also passed on the opposite side of the road. Well, a third man is the one who comes to the rescue. And I think it's interesting as Jesus tells the story. He tells about the nature of this man as well as what this man did. Jesus said, first of all, he felt compassion for the man who had been beaten up. It says he provided him with first aid. He took him to a safe place, took him to an inn. He paid to have someone care for him while he was at the inn. And he made arrangements to come back and follow up with the innkeeper and take care of any other financial obligations that needed to be dealt with. Again, very familiar story. But as we finish up this morning, I want to take a look at that story in retrospect and make some applications from it. You see, there have been a lot of lessons that taught this story. There are a lot of lessons that are taught in the story. The need for religious people to put their beliefs in action. Helping someone can be done by anyone. Even those who might be considered outcasts in the people of religion. But I think that the bottom line to what the story is about is that love is more than a cool word. It's a lifestyle. Being a godly neighbor means being involved. How do we do that? Let's take a look at three things. Number one, we must get involved with people in need. We need to be involved with people in need. The good guy did something that the other two did not. He did something. That is the difference between these three individuals. The others were aware of the need, but they didn't do anything to make a difference. They were probably even aware of the commandment to love your neighbor, but they just kept walking. Only one of the people in the story did what godly people do. The Samaritan cared enough to literally and figuratively get his hands dirty. And that is the real life definition of love. Love is getting our hands dirty. Folks, Christianity is not an academic exercise. It's not enough to know the message of love. It's not even enough to be able to explain the message of love. Christians have a responsibility to get involved in helping those who need help. Now, this involves two things. First of all, it means that we need to be out there looking for people who need help. And folks, if you haven't seen anybody who needs help, you need to get a better pair of glasses. We live in a world that is filled with people who need help. But not only do we need to be looking for it, we need to involve ourselves with those who can use our help. You might want to write this down. Life is messy. And Christians have an obligation to help make other people's lives better. Did you notice what started this whole thing? Not the robbers. What started this whole process for the Samaritan was he had compassion for the guy. Go back and look at Jesus' explanation. He said, and the Samaritan had compassion on him. Compassion is what takes the message of love off the pages and inserts it into the lives of people we meet. We see people all around us who are in need, and so did the Levite and the priest. The thing that makes us different is an actual ability to care and have compassion on those we see. So number one, the first lesson of living Christianity in the real world is getting involved with people in need. Number two, we need to be willing to sacrifice for people in need. We need to be willing to sacrifice for people in need. Not only did the Samaritan get involved, he sacrificed for the man. You look at the story. He got oily, dirty, and bloody. And that was even before there was hand sanitizer. Kind of like today. He put the man on his mode of transportation. Not only did he get down off of his donkey I'm assuming he was riding it, but he put the other man on his transportation. He went out of his way to take him to the inn, and he paid for the room and the provisions. When we're talking about being a neighbor, and I came across somebody a book the other day, and as I was reading it, the guy differentiates between the verb and the noun neighbor. The noun is somebody who lives next door to somebody. The verb is somebody who reaches out and helps somebody. Love costs. When it comes to being a neighbor, love costs. Now, it is great to go out and say, our thoughts and prayers are with you. You can post that on Facebook. You can shout it from the mountaintops. You can do whatever you want to. That's great. But let me ask a question. Is that all we can offer? Now, I'm not discounting the value of prayer. I believe in prayer, and we need to be praying more than what we do. But sometimes the question is that all I can do? We need to be offering prayers and thoughts for people, but is that the only thing that we can do? And oftentimes the answer is no. What talents and opportunities have we been given, and how do we use those to help those who need more than just thoughts and prayers? Let me ask you a question. Are we the ones that are the answer to somebody else's prayer? Are we the one that God has appointed to do our work, to do His work? If so, it's going to cost us our involvement. A lot of times we look at the emotional price of love, but too often there are other costs associated with helping people. It requires time. It requires money. It requires going out of our way and getting out of our comfort zones. Love is costly. But when we are willing to give of ourselves and help the people around us, we have a chance to open up their ears to listening to the message of salvation. And even if they don't make that connection between what we have done and the message that we teach them, it is the right thing to do from several reasons. Let me give you another reason, and that is, you see, what we have been called to do pales in comparison to what people have done for us. When I look back on what people have sacrificed for me, it's incredible. Whether it is their time, their lives, their money, their forgiveness. It's the least of what I can do to pass this on to other people. And that's not even talking about Jesus. Just think about what He has sacrificed for us. Let's not look at helping people as an investment in their lives as much as it is a gift of love to them. We do it because we can. We do it because we want to. We do it because of what has been given to us from others. We need to be willing to sacrifice for people in need. The third thing that we can take away from this is we need to be willing to follow up and follow through with people in need. We need to be able to follow up and follow through with people in need. The good guy took care of the man's immediate needs, but he wasn't content with that. He made a down payment for future expenses, and he promised to come back and take care of anything else, any other expense that was incurred by the innkeeper. When we find people in crisis, we need to be thinking about two things. Number one, what do they need now? And number two, what do they need next? It's easy to do a good deed and take care of what do they need now. And it's easy when we do a good deed and we take care of the now and we walk away and pat ourselves on the back thinking, man, I have done something. And that's great. But what are we going to do next? When we take care of today's need, oftentimes that is just the beginning of what needs to be done. If you have personally been through a crisis, you know that the toughest times often comes days and weeks and maybe years down the road. It's great to have people show up at the moment of need. But where are they when the wounds begin to heal, but the scars remain? Christian love is more than bandaging wounds. It's also restoring souls, literally and figuratively. We need to be committed for the long haul. And when we do that, it builds trust and it builds family. We need to take the gospel message to the world. That's a requirement that we need to do. We have that's not an option. We need to take the gospel message out into the world and preach Jesus. Maybe one of the best ways we can do that is by sharing God's mercy with the world. One person, one crisis, one need at a time. Again, we appreciate you being here this morning. We live in a time that is very uncertain, and Mike was spot on this morning when he talked about that. There's a lot of information out there, and it's very scary. And I think the biggest thing is we just don't know what's going to happen. But there are some things that we can control, and one of those is our eternal destination. One of these days, we're going to get back to having Bible class on Sunday morning. And we're going right back to 1 John. Because one of the great messages of 1 John is we can know that we have salvation. As our world looks for answers today, there's a lot of things we don't know. But as Christians and as spiritual people, we do know that there is salvation, that there is hope, and there is eternal life.